Okay.
Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Bobby A, and today I wanted to tell you about how much I really love the Hudson Music digital app. Okay, now, check it out. It's an app that you can get for your device, and you can purchase books from the Hudson Music digital store and have them stored right on your device. The great thing about it is you always have it with you, and any content that might be video related or music related is right there at your fingertips. It's a wonderful resource.
I absolutely love playing drums, and I couldn't imagine not having that in my life. And I really, if I could help facilitate that and have an impact on your life so that you can play drums, that means the world to me.
All right, we're coming on a little late, but better late than never. This is Drummer Nation Live, the show where we talk about drums and drumming with some of the best in the business. And today is no exception, as I have my old friend John Riley from New York City. Welcome, John. How are you, brother?
Oh, very good. Great to see you, Michael.
Same here. We had a little trouble getting started, but I have a favorite line from Spaceballs, the movie, which is, even in the future, nothing works. So, we knew each other years ago at North Texas State in the early 70s. And to clarify, John was a rising star. I was a beginner, but I learned a great deal from him and many of the others at the school. And John, I was just thinking, since you've become such a profound educator, back then we didn't have a lot of books. This was 73 and 4. There wasn't a lot of drum books, was there?
No, there wasn't. And it seemed like drum teachers in general were really frugal too. So they tried to get as much mileage out of the books that were available as possible. That's why there's so many, treatments of stick control and syncopation in those books.
It's funny you mentioned those. That's what I was going to say. Syncopation, which is an excellent book, still in wide use for drum set, but we adapted it to drum set. Stick control, same thing. The Belson book. I don't think even bass drum control was about written for a kit, really, was it?
I never really, I hate to say it, but I never really used that book. So I'm not that familiar with the
Okay.
origins of it. But the thing I found interesting about, that made stick control and syncopation in particular, really flexible was that there was very little text in there that would close your mind into what you could do with the material. And so that allowed people to solve all kinds of problems by putting different kinds of treatments on the information in those books.
And it still holds today. A lot of people still teach out of those.
Oh yeah.
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 Now, in the years following, I think you might agree there was sort of a glut of books. Everybody and their brother put a book out, but yours have managed to, weather the test of time and have become standards in percussion pedagogy. I'm going to compliment you on that.
Well, thanks. I had no idea that would be what history would show. But I think that they presented material perhaps in a little more hands-on way because of the text that explained why you did things, which was the element that was missing from stick control and syncopation. And even the Chapin book didn't have much text guiding you to the musical applications of the material.
Exactly. When I look at the art of bop drumming, we're going to look at three of them today: the art of bop drumming, beyond bop, and then your new book we'll talk extensively about. But when I look at this book, what's different about it is you still have all the independence exercises, you might call them, some primers on basic stuff, a big section on brushes, but the music is presented as the music of, here's Kenny Clark or Max or Tony or all these guys, and not Tony yet in this book. This is about Bob, but and then the music is the literature is presented in musical phrases that really speak to the drummer in a way that can be immediately applied. Whereas, no slight on the Chapin book and all, but it wasn't set in a musical background.
Well, I think that's something that people appreciate about the books of mine, and that the text gives some context also.
Exactly.
The phrases are the real phrases that people play, and then the text helps you figure out why they played them and where you might use them.
hmm hmm Well, it became a staple. A lot of teachers use it. I use it. The next book, though, Beyond Bop Drumming, which is one of my favorite books ever. At the time we were in North Texas was a time when the drummers were starting to absorb the lessons of the drummers from the middle and late 60s, right? With a broken up type of feel. And that was kind of the dominant feeling among the drummers when I was there. You've got some great, I'm going to read from your book. Roy Haynes, who was called the father of modern drumming and still sounds fresh today, and Mel Lewis, who had been credited with introducing the important idea of the open beat. Now, by employing broken time, these men, in essence, told their bandmates that each player in the ensemble was responsible for keeping his own time, and as drummers, they weren't going to babysit. Expand upon
Well,
that a bit.
we still have that issue at times, but the drummers played in a more without sound, well, in a more free flowing way and a less somewhat predictable way, even though the pulse was still strong. The way the pulse was distributed and divided between events um, was a little more dispersed. The one wasn't necessarily accented in the same way. So phrases became longer, more sort of cross rhythms, hemiolas, and it just opened up things for the drummer and required a greater consciousness and rhythmic stability from the other musicians.
So well articulated. Now, it wasn't just the drumming that changed. As always, the music was changing too. So instead of lines like from bebop, there were longer themes like Nefertiti or things like that. That to read from your book again, as the '60s began, band leaders were asking for and expecting more from their drummers. The music's slower moving harmonic rhythm, as just mentioned, created a fresh environment and presented opportunities for collective interaction that had been inconceivable just a few years earlier. As a result, drummers had to become both more complete and more imaginative as musicians because, above all their traditional functions, they now found themselves with the substantial additional responsibility of creating new sonic milieus for the new music to work. So, like any contribution or advancement or change, it's the whole music that changes, right?
It's the whole music that changes, and rarely are the drummers the ones that initiate the change. We're primarily accompanists, so we're modifying the things we know to fit whatever the new formation is, the new feeling, the new direction that composers bring to the table.
hmm And in this book, Beyond Bop Drumming, I think this was the first book I ever saw that laid that out. That stuff from the
Mm,
'60s, that changed everything, and it changed the way even big band was played. Right? You're an exponent of that when you play with Woody's band, and now you still do the Vanguard gig, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's still coming from this direction into a big band, updated for today.
I think so, but I think maybe, you know, Ed Soph was forecasting that in the 60s with the way he played, and maybe some other people, maybe even before that, Shelly Manne in a way, and of course Mel Lewis.
Mel, yeah.
But for me, the first sort of vivid example of the more modern approach to playing big band, the first example I heard was Ed Soph playing.
Yeah, I think so too. And we heard it
Yeah.
on those old early lab band albums, 66 and 7. I think those are probably still available, right?
Yeah, and also the Woody Herman record, Giant Steps in particular.
Absolutely. And I spoke
Yeah.
to him about that and how he had brought that style into modern big band playing. And he said sometimes the band wasn't ready for it and they might just fall apart. And Woody took him aside and he said, I hear what you're doing, but just a little bit at a time.
Well, yeah, we need to introduce these things so that people continue to trust us. You know, that's a big part of music and the signals we send each other. People need to trust each other. So if you lay a whole mess of abstract stuff on them all at once, they lose confidence in themselves and in us, and then it becomes more of a problem.
Hmm.
But if you can, you know, show a little bit of this kind of motivic material, and they have a chance to grasp it, then you can build on that.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah, it's a process.
And also I think the playing behind it got a little more towards a big band, but when the soloists were there, it was more like a contemporary combo.
Agreed. Yeah, and Mel was really responsible for that,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
uh, you know, Ed and other people afterwards.
Right. Let me show you some of these books for the people who haven't seen them yet. There's The Art of Bop Drumming and then Beyond Bop. And do you think of this next book as a part of a triptych? Or, I mean, it's an updated earlier book, but they seem to go very well together.
I think it has components that the other books don't have, and it also just fortifies the concepts of the prior books
That,
and shows you how you can take them even further.
right. Well, you start with something you call Headroom. Tell us what Headroom is.
Headroom is the idea that you need to have more capacity than the job requires. And I remember as a kid hearing that term being used in relation to stereo equipment
Hmm.
and power of an amplifier, and also in relation to cars. And I think the analogy I use in the book is if you have a car that's capable of a maximum speed of 60 miles an hour, when it's going 60, that's all you've got. But if you have a Ferrari that can go 200 miles an hour, when it's going 60, it's a breeze. And all of the capacity above 60 miles an hour is what makes that thing work so well at 60. So that doesn't mean everybody needs to be able to play like Buddy Rich or Vinnie Colaiuta,
Hmm.
but whatever setting you're in, you want to have more capacities than the setting requires so that you can play with the flow, so you can play with the relaxation, and so that your ears are open to hear what the other musicians are playing
Hmm.
rather than
Hmm.
stressing about, can I keep my hi-hat on 2 and 4 at this tempo?
Right, right. And through that chapter, you've got all kinds of, and this is what I dig. You've got these musical phrases that are groups of three, four, five, six, 7. But you say in the video, there's some great videos. By the way, the book is laid out wonderfully. Joe Bergamini did done a great job. Um, the very concise and easy to understand, and also you've got audio and video examples online that tie into this. But when you play through these exercises, I heard you say, now that's not music, which I really appreciated because you're making a distinct difference between we're playing phrases here, we're playing exercises here. That's not the music part. This is what you do to get ready to play music.
Well, it's fitness training. You know, baseball players lift weights. Well, the bat isn't that heavy. The ball isn't that heavy, but they want to become stronger overall. And so these are the kinds of exercises, the kind of drumming fitness that makes the things that we have to do normally easier. So that's providing some headroom. When you get these things together, you have headroom for the more commonplace stuff that you play.
Mm-hmm. Now, I kind of skipped ahead because there's a primer in the beginning that I really like too about sticks, about holding the sticks and all. And, I've heard a lot of people talk about, I don't know if you can see this on camera, German, right? And French and American. And then you have traditional and matched and whether or not the fulcrum is closed or open and all this stuff the drummers have argued about forever. And Steve Smith in his book talks about asymmetrical grips, right? So all of a sudden it's not like a right and a wrong way to do it. It has to whatever sounds works for you and sounds musical. But you listed in terms of two grips, loose grip and a tight grip. I don't know if you call it a tight grip, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So a firm grip, it's a firm grip and a loose grip. And that made a lot of sense to me. Talk about that.
Well, I think that the we have a couple of options. We can either try and control movement down to the drum and up from the drum, or we can allow the fact that the stick might want to rebound. We can try and capitalize on that. And so in the firm grip, you're controlling motion down and up. In the loose grip, you're allowing the stick to fly into the surface and propel your hand back up. So those are the main things.
That's a great way to look at it, though. It's very concise. And now you also show about improvising with these phrases in music. You start off with Mary Had a Little Lamb, playing time and go da da boop boop da 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 boop boop bop, right? And then the next time through it's da ba da 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 da, and it gets into boo da boo da da boom da da boom, and improvising and adding triplets and all that stuff. But you show how you can take just the simplest of melodies and use melody as your guide, and you'll never get lost. You always know where fours and eights are in choruses, and it can be infinite in how you expand it. That's a very well put way to look at
Oh,
it.
thank you. Yeah, I think we have the technical side of things, but then we really have to figure out how we're going to use those skills in a musical setting. And so that's a little example of how to use the coordination stuff that you've cultivated to
Mhm.
generate some kind of musical ideas.
Wonderfully laid out. Now, macro and micro timing. What are we getting at there?
Um, when I listen to certain drummers, I hear an incredible consistency of tempo from the beginning of the song to the end of the song. And that I would call macro time. And then micro timing is how accurately are the subdivisions between the beats placed. And so it's possible to have really good macro time, but for the micro time to be a little weird. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but a lot of people think that Elvin Jones kind of has that characteristic. I will definitely confirm that his macro time is excellent.
Mhm.
And some people think the internal part is a little wobbly, and that makes it hard to transcribe or hard to follow. Whereas some other drummers have really good synchronization of the coordination elements, but maybe over the course of 7 or 8 minutes, the tempo really accelerates. And so I would say their micro timing is really good, but their macro timing isn't uh, as as good.
That's very
That
interesting.
doesn't mean that the music that they play isn't as good. It just means that the tempo isn't as good.
I understand. It's just one element of the music, and it's not a pejorative, you're saying. But in one of your books, you talked about Jack DeJohnette's story where he talks about a clothes in a dryer, and they're going around at a continuous speed. But inside that, the clothes are falling willy nilly, kind of, in all different speeds and force. And he made that correlation to music. That was very interesting.
Yeah, so where's the accent? If the laundry always falls down at the bottom of the rotation, then the accent is always on one. But if it can fall in different places, then even though the machine is rotating at a fixed rate,
Hmm.
which we could equate with the measure or the 4 bars or whatever, that's 4 bars that takes. Well, if the accent is always on beat one of every 4 bars, musically things are kind of stale. But if the accents are shifting and in a somewhat unpredictable way, even though the 4 bars are stable, then there's some intrigue and there's some different kinds of tension created in the music.
Right. So it's not offered as a pejorative. I mean, we've heard
No,
people say the great drummers make their living in the space between the notes.
um, yes, yes, and in the notes.
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, now we have people playing with synthesizers, sequencers, loops, all those things. That would tend towards more the micro timing, right?
Well, I think when you play with a sequencer, it's responsible for the macro time.
Hmm.
And then what you do inside of it, um, a lot of drummers like Chris Dave and Questlove, they're moving things around on a micro level to make the pulse feel in a particular way,
Hmm.
and they're doing it in some fashions that jazz drummers rarely explored,
Hmm. Very
and that's
cool.
because they have the stability of of a backing track or a sequence or a click, and they have a really good sense of the beat as well.
That's a whole different way of thinking about things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
One of the
intriguing.
Very intriguing. Yeah, yeah. That subject of another book, maybe. One of the things you put together in a way I've never seen, I'm going to offer it on the screen here, is a method of writing these metric modulations that are such an important part of this music in a way that's very concise. I'm going to put that on the screen, as fair use. I'm not giving away your book. I'm just showing a little bit of it. And you see that you're talking here about the first measure is just straight time, ding, ding, a ding, ding, a ding. Then you divide it into quarter note triplets. Then it keeps doubling and doubling and doubling, and but in modulated ways. And there's a video of you doing it. I'm going to play. Just this is less than 2 minutes. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So each one of these are played twice. I think that's the first one. The one on the right would be the second one. Second line would be the third one. Third one. Fourth one. It's kind of like triple time.
That's the fifth one.
Fifth one, I'm sorry, you're right. Now back down the ladder. Sixth one. Wonderful, man. I've never seen that presented that cleanly and precisely that really demonstrates where that's at. And so congratulations on that. That's just wonderful. But the
Thank
thing to
you.
remember is rarely is that happening that way in the music. It's the phrases, the musical phrases are laid inside of these subdivisions, and they're switching and moving all the time, collectively and singularly, in groups like the Miles Davis Quintet of the late '60s.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the group that I heard at the forefront of that sort of exploration. I should just clarify one thing. I think that the audio example you showed was slightly different than the text. I play it two different ways,
Right.
and so the text that you showed was actually the audio. The video was the first example, but the text was from the second example, where my feet also modulated at the tempo. So the
Yep.
text looked like my feet were modulating, but in that example, the video, my feet were staying in the slow 4/4.
I was
And
going to
that's
mention.
definitely the way, that's the way to work on it first.
Right.
Sorry.
I was going to mention that, and I pulled the wrong one up, but I was going to mention you do it both ways. And
Yeah.
but again, the key is that they're pulling these things in fragments. You know, Miles would play something, and Tony would answer it, or vice versa. And you're hearing these, and Ron would go with him. You're hearing these subdivisions change all the time, collectively. I mean, that takes some work.
Well, and it creates a kind of fluidity and a different kind of intrigue um, in the music that was an area that they wanted to expand
Hmm. Hmm.
because ding, ding, a 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 ding for 10 minutes felt kind of stale to them. So they're
Hmm.
trying to find ways to enliven it. And there's a record that I mentioned in the Beyond Bop Drumming, the Wynton Marsalis Standard Time Volume 1,
Yeah.
where they explore these things, and in a way, they play them cleaner than Miles's band did. So
Hmm.
that might be something to check out to hear it more clearly.
Right. It had
They
been more
sort
codified
of
by then.
quantized,
You know.
yeah, they sort of quantized the exploration of what Tony and Herbie were
Hmm.
doing.
Hmm. Now, this style, this is not for everybody, right? I mean, there are some jazz gigs you'll do where you really can't play this way.
Oh, there's a lot of jazz gigs where you won't, where the other musicians won't send a signal that they would desire the music to go in that direction.
Exactly.
You know, yeah.
Um, One of the things young
Yeah.
drummers do, I remember when I was a kid, I was 17, I had a gig at, or 18, I guess, 17, Six Flags Over Georgia with a Dixieland band. And I had just gone to North Texas and was hip to Elvin and Paul Motion and Jack T. Jeanette and Tony. And you can't play that way in a Dixieland band, or you're known as the drummer who used to have that gig. Right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Um, I was talking to Paul Motion one time, and he told me how much he, at that time, was listening to Kenny Clark.
Hmm.
And he had just come across these audio interviews of Kenny Clark, which maybe you've heard some of, but there's like 3 or 4 or 5 hours of Kenny Clark talking about how he came up in the 30s and how things evolved. And that's what was intriguing Paul, in 2005 or whatever year that was.
Hmm.
So things never really become old fashioned, and the information is there that we can take and expand on,
Right.
learn from, and expand on.
I also talked to Marty Morell at one point, who was followed later on in that Bill Evans trio. And I said, "This isn't something you probably never mentioned off the bandstand, isn't it?" He said, "Yeah, we never talked about it ever."
Right, right.
Amazing.
No, people assume if you can hear it, or if I suggest it and you can hear it, then you'll do something with it. If I suggest it and you can't hear it, then my explaining it to you probably isn't going to make the music any better.
That's a good point. Yeah, you hear it or you don't. Moving through your book, I will finish this quickly. We got chapter 3. You talk about the 4 important elements of music is technique, groove, creativity, musicianship. They all go hand in hand. You want to expound upon that a little bit?
I think that's the whole story. um,
Well, you talk about building musical phrases. You talk about song form. You talk about drumming words. I've never seen that term before. I like that. What would a drumming word be? A phrase?
boop, boop.
Right.
That's a drumming word. And
And
every
that's famous
drummer,
Max Roach solo, if people don't know.
yeah. And so having a handle on some of that stuff kind of fortifies the skeleton of everything else you play.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you name this book
People,
the. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
You name this book the Master Drummer Expanded Edition: How to Practice, Play, and Think Like a Pro. This is not a beginner's book. This is really good, great exposition on some complicated stuff that's so well put together and will make it a lot easier for people to understand. And then there's a lot of playing examples and solos that you not only play but you break down and talk about the phrases. So if I were evaluating this book, 5 out of 5, man, 10 out of 10, whatever you got, fingers and toes, 20 out of 20. Did you visualize these as you didn't start out that way, but like as a triptych with Bob drumming, Beyond Bob, and then the master drummer?
No, I didn't. I envisioned 3 books in the beginning, and in fact, the first book I wrote was 3 books. It was The Art of Bob Drumming, Beyond Bob Drumming, and a book on big band drumming. And this was all in one folder. And when the publisher saw that, they said, well, that's way too big.
Mm-hmm.
You have to split this thing up. So that became The Art of Bob Drumming, and then Beyond Bob Drumming. And I could never convince anybody to fund the proper kind of big band recording that would have been required to make the 3rd book. So that went by the wayside. But there, so I never really thought of them as, I thought of those first 2 as sequential.
I see. Now, do you still teach at the Manhattan School of Music?
I do.
Where else
Yes.
do you teach?
I'm teaching about 2 days a week at the Manhattan School of Music and 1 day a week at Kutztown University in Pennsylvania, which I have a house in Pennsylvania and an apartment in New York.
Beautiful. Now, let me ask you this. There's been the book, well noted, wonderful book. I love it. Let's talk about some other things. The quality of the kids coming through the music programs, pretty amazing.
In many ways, very amazing. And in other ways, sometimes missing some real basic fundamentals, but amazing in other ways in terms of technical or coordination or speed.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole picture, the whole package, to get the whole package from an 18-year-old is still pretty rare.
Well, let's talk about that, because there's a lot of YouTube sensation drummers now who have come up doing covers and doing, I don't know, they're wonderful players. I can't do what they can do. But they've been described by some of the older players as, Roy Burns used to call them Olympic drummers. And our friend Adam Nussbaum has a great quote. He says, way too much of not enough. Now, we're not here to insult other drummers, but to lift everyone. But is that some of the qualities you find that are missing in that? How are those kids? Are they moving into the schools, or are they just doing their own thing?
Well, I don't know about specific people.
No, I really wasn't focusing on a person.
Yeah, some of those guys are coming into school, and look, drums, there's a huge technical component to playing the drums. And so I mentioned those 4 qualities. The easiest one of the 4 to get good at is technique. And that's because you can do that by yourself. in your house. And it's also the easiest one to measure progress with. You have a metronome. Okay, I can play paradiddles at 80. Well, last week I could only play them at 72. Next week I want to play them at 90. Before you know it, you're playing them at 250. But that doesn't have any bearing on what happens when you have to play with a bass player. So what I see often is people with an incredible muscular development, but not really understanding how to use it. And in a way, when I was 16, 17 years old studying with Joe Morello, I don't know if I should admit this, but if I put a metronome on now, probably couldn't play as fast now as I did then. But I didn't know what to do with it. And when I did do something with it, it usually wasn't very musical. So the technical side of things, whether it's hand speed or double pedal or cross sticking or any of that kind of stuff, that's pretty easy, not simple, but easy to expand on, easy to see progress on by yourself. But then what happens in context? It's like the baseball player who can lift 700 pounds but can't see the fastball coming at him.
The golfing gorilla, you know that joke? Puts
Yes.
the ball on a tee, hits it 300 yards straight as an arrow, lands on the green, walks up, hits it 300 yards straight as an arrow. You know, I can only say I echo that what you talked about in terms of fulfilling this too. I had a steady for a long time with a great band in Atlanta, and I had a great bass player. And there were nights when I would say, "Man, we nailed it tonight. Every note was right where it should be. It was perfect," and that meant nothing to me by the time I got to the car. But if I had a night where I thought, "Man, I played some shit I didn't know I was going to play," or "I don't know where that came from," or "That was creative," that felt good the next day.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and sometimes the guys that can play super fast on a pad don't hear the possibilities to embellish that might be creative.
Hmm.
It's just like a button that they turn on.
Hmm.
So getting, and look, getting experience playing with a band can help temper some of those virtuosic sides.
Hmm.
So it's not, I respect people that have worked on the components of their playing that they're able to work on in the circumstance that they're in. But that's not the end of the story. That's a part of a piece of the puzzle, which, the other pieces are creativity and groove and musicianship. Musicianship is the context where you put that speed, where you put the double pedal, where you put the crossovers. Do you put them in places that enhance the music? Does it feel like it's in good taste? Is it inspiring the people you're playing with? Those are the important elements.
Well said. And now those are the things you learn on the bandstand. Generally speaking, there are fewer opportunities these days, don't you think? I mean, do you worry about all these great kids who are coming up under your guidance and many of the other great teachers out there that, or it's just music will find a way? I mean, where do you weigh in on that?
Uh, well, I don't know. It seems like the day I moved to New York, 100 other drummers moved to New York,
Hmm.
and 98 of them played better than me. But 5 years later, 80 of them were gone.
Hmm.
And 10 years later, 90 of them were gone. And now I can tell you there's Adam Nussbaum and Kenny Washington and a couple other guys that all arrived at about the same time. Um, so it's never been easy. Um, I think people are in general, playing at a higher level than ever before. And there are opportunities. There's always opportunities for exceptional musical players. So I'm not worried about the young guys. The ones that do the work and have the right kind of comprehension about what the challenge is, they're going to succeed.
Great
But
point.
if you think just getting another 10 beats on the metronome is the thing that's missing in your career, or for your career to take off, something's out of proportion.
Perfect. I've been remiss. Let me put a couple of spots in here and we'll come back and wrap up. Hang tight a second.
Okay.
Hello everyone, my name is David Victor. I'm General Manager with the Craviato Drum Company. We wanted to offer a one-ply, solid shell product, but we wanted it to stay true to our mission of offering handmade drums of uncompromised quality built here in the USA. So take a listen to our Center Stage Series drum set.
Memphis Drum Shop is the world's premier provider of percussion instruments. With 6 showrooms of gear, mycymbal.com, the Memphis Gong Chamber, and a first-rate repair department, turn to Memphis Drum Shop for all your percussion needs.
All right, we're talking with John Riley, famed New York drummer, Vanguard Orchestra, among many credentials. His new book, John Riley, The Master Drummer, Expanded Edition, How to Practice, Play, and Think Like a Pro. If you're just joining us, you're going to want to run back and look at this one because it's chock full of great information. John, thank you for doing the show. A couple of little questions. What was your relationship like with Mel Lewis? Wasn't he sort of a drum father to you and Nussbaum and the guys you mentioned, maybe Dennis and people who came up when you did?
And Danny Gottlieb, I think,
Yeah.
was also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mel at times was like a grouchy old man, but he loved drummers. He loved music, and he was always trying to give people pointers about how to do the job better. The pointers were never done at the drum set. They were always either come and listen to me at the club, or come over to my apartment and you can spend a day listening to records with me. And so that was the kind of mentorship that he provided. And it was great to have that kind of relationship with him, and then to play the music that was written for the way he played for as long as I've been doing it has really been educational and enlightening and enjoyable.
I haven't had the chance to hear you live with that band. Whenever I come to town, you're on the road, but you're still holding court with the Vanguard Orchestra at the Village Vanguard weekly, bi-weekly. When do you do that?
It's every Monday, and
As it has been for what, 30 years or something?
Actually, I've been there 30 years, but the band started in 1965.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and it's the same book. It's been expanded. There's about 300 arrangements in the book. And this past Monday, we played 2 or 3 things that we hadn't played since before the pandemic. And man, they still sound good. The writing is incredible.
Speaking of the pandemic, kind of shut New York down for a while. Everybody's starting to get back to normal. You doing all right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Monday night, it's at the Vanguard. I would say for the last 5 or 6 months, almost every Monday night's been sold out.
Beautiful.
So it feels great that people are curious about the music, and the band is sounding good.
Well, if you're in New York on a Monday night, you got to go down to the Vanguard and hear John with the Vanguard Orchestra. Anything else you want to touch on? Or?
Oh, no, I'm just happy to discuss music and drumming in general with you, Michael, since, I don't know if people know how accomplished you are as a player, so I appreciate sharing this opportunity with you.
Well, you're very kind, and I'm delighted to call you my friend. Hang tight, and I'm going to wrap things up here, and we can talk a bit after the show. Everybody, thank you for watching. A bunch of new people coming up. Just watch for the listings, and we'll see you next time on Drummer Nation Live. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.